Vai dar bom. É o debut. É o debut, vai dar bom, vai dar bom.
Mas desculpa, a hora que a Amanda tava vindo.
Amigo, vai lá que vai arrasar. Entregar tudo que mesa, viu? Que mesa, parabéns. Não, aquele... Mas a Lara vai arrasar.
Onde toca um instrumento, cultura de sempre. As formas de saberes, servas e oportunidades se concretizam. Os projetos se tornam mundanos, os que todo mundo precisa conhecer. É nessa cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale. Dizer que o Brasil é gigante não é um exagero. Mas um país desse tamanho, nos espaços sociais,
Boa noite, galera. Tudo bom? Então,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lara, and we will start now the panel. Everybody settling in. So let's do it. So this panel has a verse of a song, Saga de Dona Maceió, from Rafael Adoc Lobo and Luiz Antonio Sims, interpreted by Rita Benedito, that we've heard a lot in these days of flute, that honored many honors for Beatriz, to find in Beatriz, to live in Beatriz. Roda, SAIA, gira, VIDA. Turn your skirt, live the life. It's a beam of black women, trans women, women from the peripheral areas that talk about the world, about their power. Tell the world that it's enough of invisibility, it's enough of intolerance, enough of being counted, told by others. It's in that sense because it also demands a lot of rhyme and compasses that reunite in disabled young Latin American talents. Jongo, the drums of crioula, the ends of samba, the many rhythms across the Atlantic, and new layers in which women started to turn their skirts. Doing a mediúnico transe in which we can take us to the present, the past, and the future that conflude in the rhythms of Maritea and in the Carnaval of Yuliana Ortiz. She's used to the stage, and when we do the structures tremble, Maribel Camilo Gomes, better known as Maritea, the national champion of Red Bull National Colombia 2021 and the national level, the Champions All Stars 2022. So in this panel, we'll also have the poet and Ecuadorian Yuliana Ortiz poet. That was the Fever of Carnival by the the publishing house Passado Tempo in Brazil. She won the prestigious first Nobel Prize in Italy that recognizes the first best novel for a Latin American writer with less than 35 years old. Yuliana Ortiz has the support of the Cervantes Institute that will be present here at FLUP today. Thank you, Cervantes Institute. And since FLUP has a crossroads of art and culture, the mediation of this panel will be done by the poet and slam poet Luisa Romão, the author of the famous We Keep Stones that won the best book and the best book of 2022. She researches poetry and performance for over 10 years and participates in slams and singing rounds. So let's turn the skin with Maritea, Julia and Luisa Romão. Hey, oh, hey, everyone. Just to let you know that this panel will be in Spanish, okay? So if you please grab your phones for translation. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening. We are in this crossover from day to night. As was said, this panel will be in Spanish. As Maritea doesn't speak Portuguese, I'll do the mediation also in Spanish so that we can have a dialogue, a better, more fluid dialogue, and so that the translation won't oscillate between Portuguese and English, even though we speak a lot of Portuñol. Maybe it's the language of the future. So I'd like to start by saying that it's a huge pleasure to be here with two artists that I really admire and that have very fascinating poetries and poetics. Yuliana, which is a novelist, a poet, a brilliant intellectual, as you'll see, and Maritea, that is a genius of freestyle, a champion that wins all the battles. So the idea is to talk a little bit about the poetry work, the poetic composition of them, writing as well as and as also from the orality. So in order to start this round of poetry, this round of life and movement, I'd like to invite you to read something and also to improvise. So Juliana, may you start and please share with us an excerpt from your novel or something like that. Hello, good afternoon. I'm very glad to be here. I'd like to thank the people who organized FLUP, and I'm very glad to get to meet many people who are interested in the work with words in the peripheral areas. To me, that's very important. So I'll read a fragment, an excerpt of my novel that is here in the bookstore and that has been translated and published this year by Passado Tempo Publishing House. So let's do it. Amarela. I spent all day in the tree that are in the life of tree of talking with the guavas. I talk more to the larvae that live inside it. I asked them how to reach the pink heart of these fruits, as had been a life beating inside of guava. That there's no hole outside, no entrance door in that guava. Not too long ago, after this conversation, you pick up a guava full of larvae and make it mine. Inside, I imagine the brief life of the larvae, an invertebrate life that's now part of my belly of a girl. So I end up satisfied, and sometimes I don't even want to have lunch, and then we start to have problems. Eat, daughter. You seem like you're going to break. You're so bony. So, daughter, please eat. It's going to get cold. You're so skinny. You look like you're sick. Do you want people to call you skinny on the street? That's why you have to eat, daughter. but I avoid eating. And then I think about the animals and bones that used to turn parts of my body. So they run through my veins and are part now of my liquid, of my blood. I see them leaving my pussy, just like when the dogs, the female dog of the neighborhood, is in the patio. And since I'm always climbed on a tree, I see the miracle of a dog being born, rupturing the body of its mother. The only thing that convinces me to eat is my sister Rita, one of the youngest daughters of my mother. She she called Rita the fighting skinny girl because she's skinny and she comes like she looks like she came from a magazine. The big eyes, the contrast with the small, how small their mouth is. She laughs at me and she's very careful with me with little soups and she takes me to eat with the boys that hit on her, which are many, because Rita is the most beautiful of daughter of one of the daughters. And now to conclude, we'll read an excerpt from a poem. I don't think it will be as beautiful as Louisa has done on Wednesday, as actually on Thursday, but I'll try. I'll read in Spanish. Love song for a mechanical horse. My generation is a flaming iron horse. Under them, a constellation waits for us. I see mud stars celebrating the second come of a crystal god. Us unite around the religious ritual like it's a beast of yesterday are being born in the plexus. At night, we don't see anything that the mud and crystal dreams. Please don't take it seriously. Don't leave without before dancing with its sand confusing. Only after discovering with its mantle of mud confectionately a dress, a party dress, without even first transforming a smile that makes it clear the place that we belong and don't allow us to leave there. My friends are the flaming iron horse. As was said, let's scream on the streets to make things more pleasant. In the sidewalks and our homes, let's leave the prisons. Let's stop to have sun for today. And let's go to the corners so that when people approach us to console us, so that we can steal their purse and in its place put a most beautiful poem ever written in the world. And no matter if the passersby don't know how to read, the poem is a mouth that speaks for itself. Close your mouth, dear. Give back your mouth to where you come from. You are not necessary or the last passerby in the vertebrae of the universe. You have hands and a voice. Build castles of cards inhabited by the lines and doesn't let us kill the silence, hide the noise and the depth of my stomach. So do make pregnant the blood, the product of my abortion, so that we can sail on. Thank you. And those who were here on Thursday, we done a beat with an excerpt from her poem with my friends. My friends are flaming iron horses. My friends are party iron horses. My friends are flaming iron horses. Once again, my friends are flaming party horses. I hope there's a lot of party in this conversation. So, Maritea, I pass the floor to you. So tell me whatever you want in freestyle. Good afternoon. I will need your help with one thing. Please collaborate. With the music is something universal, so help me with that. First of all, those who were present here, a greeting to all the people who invited me to Brazil to read and also share with you and do a freestyle this afternoon from Colombia to Brazil. Charlotte means that we're disputing the streets and also laughing and improvising as we're doing right now. I'm here with a poet, a writer, a narrative, another poem all the time. I'm also like a poet, but I don't have ink. I improvise at the moment. I'll improvise if you give me the challenges. You make me do it. I have the alphabet in my mind. There's no method because I improvise. I do it when I want. If you want to do something, I don't know if you understand me, or maybe it's within your mind. Please continue doing so that I can continue throwing words from my mind because I want, because I like to rhyme. I have a lot of attitude. Thank you to all the people. The room is full, so a show of hands to everyone at Floop. Thank you. I believe there's no better way to start our conversation rather than with a poetry that comes from the book and also the poetry that is written in the air, she said. By the way, there's a literary critic that I like. He's from Peru called Pornico Polar that has a wonderful essay in which he talks about writing in the air and this poetry, in his case, Indian poetry that is not in the paper but in the voice, since the voice is a possibility to write a poetic. So I believe this topic also deals with that. So this is exactly the topic of this festival, the subject. We turn the skirt and lifespans, which is a direct reference to a very important Brazilian poet and writer, musicist called Martim da Vila. He has a song called Roda Ciranda, and it tells me that in around the skirt of the girl that dances in the ciranda, the wheels of life that turns the wheel of life that spins. So something that putting the words into movement, it's not the body, it's also the oral world that comes from this poetics. I believe that your poetry has this meeting and this encounter with music. Just like in Carnival, we have a trajectory for salsa, rumba, but also in the acting with hip hop and freestyle. In order to get to that, first of all, I want to ask you a little bit about your relationship with salsa since you were a child. I believe it's present in in both of your journeys. So please, may you start, Mari? All right. I'm from a city in Colombia called Cali. It is known as the capital of salsa. Cali has a particularity. It's next to Buenaventura, and Buenaventura has hip hop and rap, but that's where it came to Colombia. So in Cali, you either were from salsa or rap. I didn't like salsa very much, but I like rap. Was interested by that part, so I grew up hearing salsa groups as well. At least in Cali, in my time, when a girl is 10 years old, she's already in a salsa school all the time. She's listening to salsa. All the festivals are salsa festivals, and each weekend you listen to salsa. For instance, the way you dress, the way many rappers were dressing, they got their outfits from salsa. So the first was done in Puerto Rico was also done there. It comes from that. The influence of all the rappers that comes from Puerto Rico, and also from a gathering of Puerto Rico with salsa, the same thing that was replicated here in Cali.
Yes, what I do is through the construction of the meeting of a concert that I think is fundamental. When I was finding results about the voice, I think exactly because I don't have all the tools to use my voice in the scenes. I'm more interested in vocal performance and the possibility of taking the shautable to the written word. But it's one of the things that really obsesses me. And most of the literature that I read and that interests me as how to work and think when I think about aesthetically has to do with the audible. It has a very strong presence with vocal performance in the word. There are many fundamental things that were like the the root, or let's see, that were fundamental for fever or carnival. Then is another unknown soap opera written by Franz Galix, and he starts working and he starts generating another cartography of the city of Managua. And at that time this soap opera was written, there is a very strong tension among the communist groups, among the communities that were trying to generate another way of a country, and among the conservatives. So the radical conservadorism. So it's interesting to see how salsa, o guaguancó, the son, el bolero, guaracha, all these dances and musics that are highly black music, because in spite what happens in Spanish America, I don't know if it happens here in Brazil, but I've noticed that in Spanish America, the musical genders that start in black neighbors are um, used by the white people, and it's not recognized to the black communities where they start. We know that salsa, guaguancó, and son, they come from bomba and plena that black genders in Puerto Rico, but also genders that come from the Cuban music, that are plantation music that started to be made during the plantation, the first roots of the salsa. Afterwards, the massified gender brings us to what happened in New York with all the Caribbean diasporas from Central America and New York, and with the idea of massification of the salsa production. I always say that in the poor neighborhoods, Limon is an island between Ecuador and Colombia. My family is half Ecuadorian, half Colombian, and it's a rural island. It's normal for us to look at the city in order to study, and in these spaces, the policy is done in another way because of politics. There was a lot of communism, but it was like a punctual praxis not to read too many books. I always say I didn't have the experience of reading when I was a teenager, Angela Davis, and neither I never met her when I was a child, but I knew Conde Rodriguez. I used to see the vinyl records with the Lupe Celia Cruz, and the statics, not only of the music, the sound static, and also the visual static of the covers, because they're very important work of an artist. I forgot her name. She's from Puerto Rico, and he has a very interesting work with the black static, with colors and hair and clothes and everything. This was fundamental for me as a teenager, as a girl growing up, and also what I try to do, because there is a philosopher that I like very much, Historia Musical Kokwashun, and he says there's an origin of the crisis. He has his book called Brighter Than the Sun. I think it has been translated into Portuguese. And he says that what happens in Detroit with house and other genders that were made in Detroit, it was exactly a response to the crisis of the proletariat spaces. And salsa that started to have also in Cali in the Pacific, comes from the Caribbean, and you feel it in Cali in the Pacific, starts to have a place in this territory because of the different crises. In the 90s, Ecuador suffered dollarization, a very important crisis, very strong, a change of the economical matrix from an economy that was sovereign to another one because we have dollars now, but it's not an official currency. There is an oscillated currency that leaves us in a very complex economical situation. When we violate the order of changing the currency, it was a very traumatic moment when many people committed suicide in the big coastal cities of Ecuador. And we always heard salsa. I remember that at that time there was an important song, there's A Prueba de Fuego, and it had a lot of sense because the nation, you're Equatorian, you're the Peruvians, but I think that the Afro-descendant community is, the music connects with other diasporas and start to be able to bring freedom and see freedoms in other ways of freeing our body from what the nation doesn't allow. Because Ecuador is as so I'm from the Afro part of Ecuador, has a lot of link with the Caribbean. We're all the time communicating with the Caribbean, the English and French Caribbean, not only the Spanish one, because it's requirement to find something that will root us in another way, because the situation of the black body in Ecuador is oscillating situation of strategies. And salsa for me, the samba, the souk, the carnival genders of Trinidad, Tobago, and Barbados also, in a way, repatriate. The parties also, or the festivals, can be a way of repatriating ourselves in the sense of our country. So this would be the matrix or the root that gives a start to writing for me. The voice of the singer, of the sound of the people dancing and singing salsa. That's what I want to do it in writing, and that's the tension that I have, because I'm not I am not a pioneer, but I perform this when I write. And this she does in a very incredible way, because in fact the soap opera speaks a lot about salsa. A lot of moments the songs are in the body of the text, but as a reader the story has a rhythm. So it's like salsa is in the stories and descriptions, the words of the characters, something to separate it. So now we have the moment of the song, but the text also seems to have the rhythm of the dance and the music. And this is for me as if it's brilliant what you do. And so thinking about this writing that works with like a wheel of time, because we're talking here about a linear time, but a time when memory is present and also the past and the future. And then we already had here in this Saint Leila Maria Martins talking about the spiral performance. Saint Martin Davila also talks about this. I want to ask you what you think about time. So I'm going to first ask the question to both of you and start first with Mari. In your case, Fiebre de Carnaval has a construction. The time is quite complex because when we have fever, the notion of what before and what is after is quite difficult. And there is an overlapping of generation, the story of the mother repeats in the daughter. And in Marite's case, we have the present is absolute because she does it just by chance. So I would like to ask you, how is it for you, the creation that is located in the present moment, and at the same time, how can you prepare yourself to be very concentrated in this now? The capacity of improvising, you find many genders, but concretely, to improvise with rhythms or percussion of the Africans and Palincans and constantly had their percussion instruments. Many times improvising that way, it wasn't something difficult, but it was like we have the option to speak now, to say this now, and we could add the difficulty. They have to include this in a precise time or with an ending, precise ending that will become a rhyme. So this gives us a possibility. In the tournaments, I dedicate myself to try to prove that everything that is improvised is able to be. You can put on a word, and you have to improvise with the movements, with all the tools, and you can, as we commented yesterday, a moment that is created at that moment, and it will remain for that moment. Many times you go to Tarima, they say, well, you don't remember what you said before. So it's something. The magic of saying things, structure yourself, and then it's on the past. Before going to Yuliana, yes, you were talking about football, because Mari loves the balls, and something I thought was similar. Because how do you include in the game? It doesn't matter if yesterday won, today starts even 0. So as is, the past doesn't exist anymore during the game, football game. But if you do have it, because the teams have rivalry stories, when they come to the present moment, the past is already in the field. So I would like to ask you, how do you build here these rivalries? Do you build them or not in your case? When you put on your T-shirt when you go to a game, that you've already had other games together or not? That's interesting because differently from it could be a football game, you're not going to compete. You're going to compete with a word. So the narrative becomes also part of this exercise. It's important what happened is correct. I could, for example, try to face, I already won you once and I'm going to win you again tomorrow also. Or at a certain moment you can say, we have this, and now you're doing this. So you start, so each time you face a rival, you have to face another situation, then you start building a new narrative about this. It's constantly changing what happened, what will happen, and what is happening, and what could happen, or what couldn't happen. So it's always something, a constant construction also. We have a coach that was very important, and he said that the history changes as the game changes. For me, time, I think, because of the influence, I'm in a university that has a lot of link with a former colonial and many indigenous conventions of the Quechua. I studied Quechua of them, and of course, time, the building of time, indigenous people in Quechua, mainly in the Quechua nations, the time is spiral, and as Quechua is an agglutinated word, it means that you can have words according to the context, and no word, that means green color of the forest or the plant is not the same green color of the t-shirt. So you can mix everything. It's beautiful. And also the possibility of mixed language allows me, if I talk about my mother, although my mother has passed away, my mother is here because the way that we are talking about this with the words. And I'm talking about Quechua because in Ecuador we have many words that this translation is the translator tried to find a similar word, but could be understood also in the context of Brazil. But in the case of Spanish, of Ecuador, the Equatorian, we have the word añaña. Ñaña is Quichua and means sister. But ñaña is not only my blood sister, but also ñañaku. For example, the idea of ñañaku is the possibility of a sister and the sisters start building a sisterhood. It's redundant, but that's the way it is. A sisterhood that trans time. So it's very interesting, the idea of ñañaku. And it interested me a lot to write and to compose soap opera where contemporaneity that is told by a child. The childhood interests me a lot. I don't know the etymology of the word childhood. In criança, I don't know how you say it, but in Spanish, infant comes from enfance, that in Latin, infance means actually what doesn't have voice. So in what way do we build a voice? This body doesn't have a voice because it doesn't have a decision-making power. So I think when we're infants, as though we have the power, but we have a strength in the language, and this allows time to be a kind of a spiral, because the games of the infants, the childhood games, are always moving something else in temporality. So in Esmeralda, there's a song that's part of the Afro-descendant people. It's called Patacoré. It is a dance with the devil, like a shoe here. And there's a part, because it's a dance, they dance it in the forest and part of the circular dance, because the circular dances have to do with time. And water starts to increase, and it doesn't have to do, because it's like a magic of the dance. And it says water is part of the time. Water what brings time. Go through water is to travel through time. And it repeats and repeats and it repeats itself. You deliver it and you receive it. And when you notice it's the sun is the practices of the dance of the patacorés or the bateis generate another kind of temporal. And this is what I tried to work in Fiebre. I think that the complexity of infants, that usually the infants don't know their body very well.
And it tends to be a protagonist, since it doesn't have access to its body, it's tasked to create fabules, the tales. So the tail making is a possibility that we have. For instance, there's an idea from Hartman that written about this, a very super important writer in the United States. It's called critical creation of tales, and it's fables. So it creates this fable. So what we have is the footprint of a perpetrator. It's not necessary to be faithful to the what was said, to the truth. You don't need to tell. So the fables allow them to do a cut in time. So we become stranded away from reality to build this type with our vision and archive using the word, because we can do that with words. The poets like you that work with orality, playing with time. You have the time and you take the time and you use that time differently. So it's very interesting when we're writing. It seems to me that the written language allows me to play with all the times. Because in Spanish or the Castellano that we speak from the area that I am from, there's a little bit Quechua and Chachi as well, it's another indigenous population, but also by the temporality of the Afro-descendant music from the Pacific. And no time is linear, it's a spiral time. It's a time that is this branched, and it adds complexity to our written statics, but also to the oral statics. And everything we said about this idea of everything that Hartman said about how to represent the pain. In fact, if so that this pain is not the reproduction of this internal violence is not reproducing in our language, and that seems to happen in Fiebre because it's about a girl that has her childhood ruptured by a violence. So I want to know, how do you think about that? How to symbolize the violence in fiction so that it's a new violence in fact, because many times when we speak about gender violence, about the way it's represented in the newspapers, sometimes they re-victimize the victim. So I think that as writers committed with our times, we also think of other ways to symbolize this violence other than reiterating its pain. So what was that in your novel? It's important to think about new newspapers because the language that they use, with all the respect to the journalists and people that work with that, it's people, for instance, in Ecuador, the language of the newspapers is a very utilitarian language that thinks to create a. It's impossible to use subjectivism, so it comes from a place. There's no emotions. It comes from a culture archive and also some prejudices. Sometimes newspapers don't want to recognize that, and the journalists don't want to recognize it. So all these types of languages, I call it adult ways languages, because it gives the opportunity to generate a clean language, a very formal language. All this formal language to me is the empire of adulthood. And Arab Branch would say that I don't want to racialize people or the women to be really adult, at least in the system that I live in Ecuador. Because to me, it's important to remind that as a woman, most of the things that I'll do in the public spaces will be infantilized by the state, or if something happens to me, it's my fault because I shouldn't be there. There's always an adult in charge of the woman, in the racialized women. So my commitment was not to fight with adult language. I had to create a language. I had to invite a language and think of how to do a new research of how I would use and how I would search and create a childhood language with a lot of power, but a language of a survival most of all, because I think we have the tools to overthrow the state. Maybe not to really do it, but we can say that, like down the state or the church, but we can say that to family. And sometimes we can say that to family, but the family is an institution, and there's a lot of violence, and violence is the homosexuals suffer in Ecuador, and in the place of their homes, close to their homes, so with the close relatives. And how can we rebuild this fact? So the only possibility is to invent a language. And I invented it. I tried to find the voice of Noah. And I found this voice, and I started to play with the signs of the body. So I started to embody these signs of recognition, but also the latency, the knowing that something had happened in her body. in the infancies that have been feminized, sometimes they do not have total acknowledgement of their body. They do not teach about sexual education, about pleasure, and they don't know what can do, what their tutors can do or not, and about and how it's supposed that the tutor is taking care of you, and it recurs through this childhood language with the symbols that the body of a child. So the signs, the memories, the opacity, the music, and with the water. These were the possibilities that I had to oscillate and not to re-victimize a body that has been a victim before. It seems to me that as writers, we're always inventing a language. The poets always also do that. They're not always objective. It's important to think of other ways to the language. And these other ways of languages are, there are many things that had been done before, and we can bring all these branches of the language of the survival that plays with the power, and it's not a diverse exercise, even with the violence. It's so that it's not re-victimizing the person. Somebody that went through a tough moment can can claim and back her body through a party, and I believe that's what I try to do. Mari, I want to know from you what it sounds for you, because you're like the only woman who is now in La in the National League of Colombia, right? The only woman. And we were talking the other day about the word fight that has its unique dimension of a game. We're not talking about what we're talking, but many times it can symbolize a violence. And where is this limit for you when you are in the poet in those slams, in those battles? Can we talk about fair play or not when you're rhyming? And what is it like for you, this experience, to be the only woman that has managed to be between the 10 best ones in your country? Well, and there are several particularities in Spanish regarding what can be said or cannot be said. The most particular thing is that sometimes you separate a person, sometimes it's a white man, because there are most of them, like Jordan. They put on a Jordan jersey and they say that you are the worst person in the world because you're black. So it's a displacement of the origins of the same culture. So if you have a hair like this, an afro hair, it's also an insult to them. So if you're more black or if you're more white, so it's a displacement that happened based with in a culture. So imagine the heroes that made that. So you can't. It seems like you can't win a battle or a slam because you're black, and that's absurd. So it perpetuates this racial violence because you are as white as the total silence. It seems to me that you can criticize black people in the freestyle in Spanish. That's very concerning, and there are many sexist attacks. And I don't care, but because almost there isn't women competing, and they're all on top of me. We're very few in the elite of the slams. So you're here because certainly I don't know what you've done to be here. So and etc. It's they question your position, and the judges as well. So if you are women, you have to show 10 times better than the others, because if you're here, the men who are here, they're very good in rap. They won't say anything. But if you are a woman, why are you here? You should be better than the other ones, regardless of being a woman or not, because they won't question. Yes, we will question you 10 times more because you're a black woman. And if you're a black woman, they were going to question you 50 times more. And so it's very complicated. Currently, they try to include policies, and so that some things shouldn't be said. But in freestyle, there are some things, there are some limits that are very diffuse. So if your mother died on Friday, on Monday you're there. That topic is already there. Those things happens constantly. They bring that up. So they're creating certain policies so that there isn't such misogynist and attacks. But we're just still trying in this process. Now, examining your battles, I believe that you try to do it from a different narrative. Much of your metaphors go to the other way. So I want to know from you, when you are confronted with that, what are the strategies that you use using your uh, your poetics? We were talking about iterations, and she has a amazing instrumental language in the figure of speech and the use of figure of speech. But how do you prepare yourself to create this other poetry that is present in the battle? The first thing, as I said, is to have awareness of what you're doing. The improvisations started in marginalized areas. We were doing what the poets used to do, but without knowing what to do, with no people with no access to schools, no access to books. So you might find someone that is on the street, is 12 years old, they can already do tracks. They do use figure of speech, but they don't have no idea what they're doing. So currently, there's more as to people also coming from aesthetics, because if you are a woman and you go to the battles, you're also criticized by the way you're dressed, the way you walk. It's also a way to resist instead of putting keratin so they don't make a rhyme about that. I use my afro hair. I don't comb it. I don't fix my hair. I just go, and you're very good because they're using a mini skirt or something like that. So we know these kind of things happen. So from the aesthetics is a product of resistance. I'm everything you don't want me to be, and I will win now this battle. Can I ask Maritea, which is Mari, your name, and Thea, which is a designation of goddess or something like that? How did you get to this persona? I have started when I was 14. I started doing tracks, and I didn't know that it was freestyle. I had never went through my mind that it was freestyle. And people, when they saw me, said, "You should do rap. You were born in a black neighborhood. You had this way of acting, and usually black people do rap." No, it never crossed my mind. But the thing that is that it came to me a moment in which the rap and hip hop from Spain was very trendy. And if I want, what if I do a school criticizing everything that I want to accept in school? So rap comes as a way to protest. So I did my first one, a very bad one, when I was 14. And in the process, I did it with my colleague. And he said, "So how are we, what are we going to do?" So we were 14 back then. And we're in the 8th grade. Uh, so in high school, and we were starting to think of things, and I was studying Greek, and I want to be a goddess, so I put my name Maritea. Well done. Great. So I'm delighted by Greek mythology, so I love that. So you have another poetry book, and it's also a reference to the Greek mythology and so on. So this book is great because besides of being an amazing poetry, it has a strong dialogue with thinkers from the Caribbean, such as Césaire, and another one that in Brazil is not really well known, which is called Benítez Rojo. He's a Cuban philosopher that thinks a lot about the island, the idea of an island, and a rhythm that is not a linear rhythm that we're talking about the beginning of the conversations, the more chaotic rhythm of the colonial experience. And this Jupiter, this part of the book is called Jupiter. Where is it? Wait. Jupiter, the island that repeats itself, that doesn't repeat, because Benitez's book is the island that repeats itself. So it brings a more reference to it. So if you can you comment on the repetition in your work and the condition of being an island. So Benitez Rojo mentioned about the Caribbean, a natural kingdom that is in which all the repetition is a practice that is necessarily brings a difference and a step towards nothing. So it's a repetition that is unpredictable and also that has the influence of the ocean and the ocean currents. So if you can talk a little bit about that, about Benitez, about Esmeralda, and so on.
Jupiter is an island from the south of the province. It's an interesting island because near this island is another one called Portete. In 1553, a ship was going to Lima with slaves, and it was shipwrecked. It came from Sevilla and it went through the Canary Islands, and it was going towards Lima, and it was shipwrecked in 15. We had the Mangaches who were there for Guayaquil towards Esmeralda. Also, we had was in the northern part, and this was in the southern part, and then the Los Illescas, that was the most important one from the Esmeralda, that founded Esmeralda, and we have a lot of letters from him defending the space because it was not so well known, and people that started the Los Palenques not very well. A century was kept in this free zone while we had many other Equatorian zones, and we had a Palenque zone, and this person from Cabo Verde, near Portet and Jupiter Island, we have a statue of Alonso Yesca, and it's very interesting for me to think about this place as a territorial sound of temporality was broken also during this shipwreck, an unexpected one. Something was broken, and this rupture that also has to do with the ocean. These communities disembark, and then it's the indigenous zone. It's not recognized as Afro-Indigenous zone in Ecuador yet. There is resistance to this word, but it's Afro-Indigenous because of the way that we live, for the exchanges that we have, and also for the building of the space. Antonio Benítez Rojo, for me, was crucial. When I used to study, we have a group of researchers, Caribbean philosophy, and experts in Caribbean history, people that have studied, incredible people that just started, luckily reached Ecuador, and we were in this research group of the Caribbean. For me, it was very important the moment when Antonio Benítez Rojo said that the Caribbean not only is a geographic territory, but it's understanding they are geographical organization of things. It's colonial, and also understanding how it expands and how the dialogue between the ocean and the seas, this cartography of the world that we know is very colonial. There are a lot of connections because from the island that I am, we're very near Panama, for example, but if you were on a plane, you had to go another surrounding, so it seemed like if Central America was very far, the way that we organize is as if we wanted to separate us. And Benito Rojo says that the Caribbean repeats itself not only in the space that we know it as Caribbean and in New Orleans, it repeats also in Lisbon, in Brazil. It repeats in different places in the Pacific also. He talks about Caribbean gestures. He talks about some struggles and to understand like Caribbean gestures and freeing performances from the Caribbean, because all the Afro-descendant people in the Pacific, our ancestors have passed through the Caribbean. It was impossible not to go through the Caribbean to reach the Pacific. So it's interesting to think also that the gesture that we do in the black neighborhoods with the hearing of the Caribbean, with the communication. Let's think about Esmeralda, the Carnival Esmeralda. Every year we have other bands, most of them are from the Caribbean, Spanish, French, and English, because there's a necessity to connect ourselves. That's what separates ourselves by the nations, that separate us, the gesture of listening to us, the gesture of traveling through the launch, the boats. In Ecuador, the ones that are in the sea are from drug dealers, but the sea connects the world. And it's interesting for me through literature and the dialogue that we have with Caribbean, and the dialogue also the Caribbean has with me, because they're always taking me to Puerto Rico and so on. So the professors and they continue reading me. So we have a dialogue with our narratives. So I understand the gesture also, that the idea of the Caribbean continues itself in different seas. And for me, it's very important to not to think about state and nation. I think, for example, 17, 18 years, it was vital for me to learn Portuguese in order to read the Brazilian black author. It was physical need that I had, urgent, because I used to say it was impossible to be in the same continent, to be so separated by the language. So I'm not going to consider this to be able to hear, to understand. And it's something that also is a gesture that brought me here to this place. And I think for me it's a possibility. The Caribbean gestures repeat themselves and happen in many places. Further on, I'm not interested in thinking about that it's proven, but aesthetically, when we write, I think it's very rich what Antonio Vida Rojo says. And thinking in this link, not some. I remember a day that you said something that is not the territory, but the sea territory. For me, that's incredible to think about it. The sea, because I'm from an island, so I spend more time in the high sea. I spend more time in high sea than in the land. There is a condition called fidica, that the bodies are near water bodies. And it's important to think in water and the sea, because as we said about this is also part of the times and things happen where water, and thinking about this is my territory, is the possibility of thinking about another aesthetic and another way of writing. In your case, Mari, when you talked about, you asked me if I had gone to Colombia, and we said Bogota, and you said Cali is something else. Bogota is the air, mountains, and so on. So I would like you to comment a little bit with this link with the island, with the insular condition. We had a relation with Cali that is a very strong center of the Afro-diasporic culture. And we say it's also this poetic presence that you have also. Of course, if I went to Medellin city or I had been born in Bogota, Marita wouldn't exist because I had to explain from the beginning. Cali, with urban things that pass through Buenaventura. So the rap started become fashionable in Caribe because although the people concretely are not rappers, we all like to speak like this. All of us walk like this. So it's always to think about this guangacu, this flavor. So we have Colombia. We are for Caribbean. All the ones that represent internationally and nationally, and we are all from the Caribbean because we have this other essence that touches us, and we're Afro also. Concretely speaking, very curious, isn't it? But yes. So as I've grown in the south of Cali, and Puerto Resistencia, Chiraguangancas, zones that have black people, and also displacement of Chocó and Buenaventura, Tomacua. Everything ends up in the same place. It's as if, and I had also the approach to be able to rap, to have foundations to Afro cultures, to support, because I lived in Cali, because if this same process exists in other places, and also, if you're a person, for example, Afro, trying to, let's say, enter in the Medellin, Bogota industry, is very, very difficult. Like Cali gave me this possibility. If I hadn't lived in Cali, I wouldn't be in Guayaquil now. Well, we're reaching to the end. I don't know for you, but for me, time has flown. I would like to know if anybody has any question that would like to ask Marité or Juliana. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, because it's a literal question. We see with a concern the political developments in Ecuador, not so much in Colombia, but we here have had also extreme right wing governments had caused a lot of damage to literal policies. I imagine now in Ecuador things is quite complicated for culture and arts. Can you say a little bit about this in the political approach, the official one? What's happening in Ecuador is, first of all, that the government, we're in with a military government, because in January the government declared national conflict, internal national armed conflict, and also started a war against us, against drug dealers, like it happened in Mexico and Colombia also, of course. It's a war against black people and colored people from the neighborhoods. And Ecuador is many people there, but there's a great kind of resistance in the academia, in the spaces with our violence, especially on the coast when the right wing never won again. We see election map in the last election on the coast we're receiving all the bullets. The right wing doesn't win. It's not because people are not critical with the left wing. It's a strong criticism with Correa government. We don't have a state. Now we have is a rich boy that won the elections, and then you have from the elite of the banana plantation. So he is historically he is considers him the owner of the country. So it has a lot to do with what I'm writing now. To think with a presence unbearable, to centralize myself in the presence unbearable. We just launched an exhibition with a colleague, Maton Arun, Afrofuturism, a technical of the future, where we'll have some funds of Quito in order to invite black artists to think about the future. Because to think about the present is unbearable now at this moment. as black people and as people from the Ecuador with all the crisis. So, of course, the state of the right wing has canceled all the fostering policies for reading. They have denied everything that has to do with culture. Now, he knows that it's important, but what he's going to do now is that people that are going to manage the foster for reading are from the right wing. So they're going to have other readers. It's not that he doesn't want us to read, but they want us to read what they want us to read. They know that to have poets from the surroundings and people with critical thinking, mediating, reading it's a danger for them. So they're going to change everything. Now we're with shortcuts of uh, energy because we have drafts, not because of this, but also because the government didn't plan the drafts with the hydro plants. So Ecuador now is 15, 14 hours without light. In the best days, the best days, 5 hours without light. This has generated a crisis where the basic things are being affected. And in this sense, I, as a person that writes, that I'm interested, and I think that perhaps romantically, that my path and the collective path towards freedom is creation. We're thinking about the future. We're meeting to think about the future because we have the miniatures in the streets, they're armed, and we're all the time being contacted. So we're trying to be ready, creating something to leave the footprints towards the future. That's what we're doing now, hoping that in the next election this person won't win again. It's very complicated because the lack of information is terrible and it's shameful and very vulgar. But I always dream with the impossible. So I hope something happens. And while this happens, we're thinking about the future and organizing ourselves. That's what we're doing. Do you want to say something? As she was commenting, in Colombia, we had a change in government, a change towards policies, and we're betting in renewable energy, natural energy, a step to the lack of fires and conflicts. And fortunately, it's not like in the past. This is our first left-wing government after a long time that we had the right wing. So as we mentioned, we're the president is trying to negotiate with black communities, indigenous people that are very forgotten in Colombia, and to change the energy for polluting energies and mining and all these things. We're betting for different things, and we hope that Colombia possibly we're going to have a re-election or to have this other party again in order to. We're having many things in the neighborhoods. We're trying to think about the black, indigenous, marginalized people, the forgotten people, Chocó, Buenaventura, Cali, Tomaco. A lot of violence and many things to take. The indigenous people, La Guajira, the Amazonas, they sit down with all of them and have a dialogue, expected to have a change much better than we have now. We have a question for a last question. Thank you. Maritea, I was remembering that you were recently had the COP26, right? In Colombia, in Cali. Yes. I would like to know, for example, if you have known anything about Brazil, do you have any reference with what what you do with language? Do you have any parameter? Do you have any connection with us? Okay. I remember when I was in my music class and I was trying to play guitar, I told the professor, I had a lot of problems with music. I know how to improvise, but I don't know how to fit concretely is there any problem? And he said, let's try and start with Brazilian music. And the first thing that I played in a guitar was Chorando. Yes, that was the first song that I learned in my guitar. And Afrobeat and the rhythms that I practice. I hear a lot of people from here and also say what is essential, because the rap in the United States is already played by many white people, so many cultural appropriation. So in Colombia, the Pacific, and Andres in Brazil, we still have the other rhythms that are always shown what we are doing. Last question. I'm going to be quick. The question that I have is for you. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but thinking about the elections in the United States and what could see going backwards for a progressive thinking. When you think about, we talk about, what are you talking about? What do you mean? How are you dealing with a failed stage, or perhaps an aggressive stage, enemy, because what we're going to have now in the United States could be a dictatorship. And I'm not exaggerating. Yes, of course. It would be a quilombarnos to try and find spaces in the community, in the neighborhoods. We have found it through many funds of international donors, because the state wasn't giving anything for culture. We're working a lot with international donations and international funds, and we have founded some libraries in black neighborhoods, and we are also working with batucadas, and I know this is here from Brazil. And now in the neighborhoods from Afro-descendants, colleague got some funds to have popular batucadas. And this has generated an incredible change in the poorest neighborhoods in Guayaquil, because Guayaquil is one of the most dangerous city in Ecuador or in the world. And Ecuador also is over Colombia in exports of cocaine in the first time in history. So we are also working, above all, from these places that allow us to have a social tissue. We have a lack or absence of state structure, and we're trying to work with social tissue. We have spaces for reading in the streets. We also have some state spaces that are structural. They remain from the previous government that had to do with arts. And it's a very safe space in the center of the city for the media of the trans community, for meetings of Afro-descendant communities, for organizations of the parades, the workshops. And in Guayaquil,
the people live, and it's so ridiculous, the amount of police officers. So there's no safe place. So the University of Arts is the one that was not taken by the state, even though the state pressure us all the time. So they put us under this pressure also to keep it apart as well. So in Quito, the capital, there's a lot of more structure. The mayor that won is a leftist. So there's several processes that are being carried away, and he's doing, because since Quito is the capital, many people there were displaced by the drug dealers from Esmeralda, where I'm from. They went to the capital. They are organized. There's a lot of people on the street. And the last march against the governor, there were massive marches. And in the city of Esmeralda, there's no manifestations, no protests, because the police is more dangerous due to the drug trafficking and the sea thing. So the protests are concentrated in the capital and Guayaquil. And what we're dealing with, we're working with the social tissue because the state's structure doesn't help us. So we're organizing ourselves in what would be a creation of maroons or maroon settlements or the quilombos, like quilombos. There's similar structures, and that's what we're doing, organize ourselves. Well, so I'd like to thank for the presence of all of you. I thank you so much for this conversation, this exchange of idea. Juliana, Maritea, I'd like to thank also our interpreters for sign language, and the program continues. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Isso